Hello, my name is Alex and welcome to my channel. Last time we talked about loops and one-shots, and we discussed different types of them, and in that video I even managed to make 1 minute of intro to a song by combining elements from 4 different construction kits. So that's why I highly recommend watching it if you want to learn this way of beating or dealing with the creative block. And today we'll be talking about signal chain and different types of audio effects. I will explain what the signal chain is and what the types of audio effects are. And this is a basic level video, so by the end of it you will have some kind of one-on-one understanding of the roles of these tools and scenarios of their usage. So if you're ready, let's dive in. Let me remind you that a couple of videos ago we were talking about the signal flow, and I was showing you how it looks like in Ableton Live. So let's bring that scheme back again. The signal flow is the whole map of signal traveling from the very start to the very end. And as you can see, it goes through some rectangles here that represent the tracks in Ableton Live. But the thing is that inside these rectangles, inside these tracks, the signal follows some path too. And it starts at the signal input and ends at the signal output, sometimes going through and sometimes not, what's called inserts or modules that affect the sound. And this is what signal chain is, and the inserts are the audio effects, well, just to make it simple. But why do I even cover this topic? The first reason is that it is extremely rare that you'll be using audio, loops or one-shots as it is. In majority of cases, samples will require some kind of treatment to make them sound better, either within their own tracks or along with other audio samples in other tracks. The second reason is that the order of these effects matter, so you really need to know what to apply and when. Sometimes you may come across posts regarding the best signal chains for something, guitars or vocals, and you better know when to take this information from this post into account and when to pass just by. And the third reason is that sooner or later you'll face the need to make your production fit into some standards. And to make sure it does, again you need to know which tools will help you best and when to use them. And now let's talk about the types of audio effects. In Ableton Live, all these tools can be found in Audio Effects section of the browser. Spectral effects are probably the most well-known among them all. If you've ever seen bass and treble knobs on some home audio equipment, then you already know what's this all about. These effects deal with the frequency spectrum and include filters and equalizers. Ableton Live's spectral effects include Auto Filter, Channel EQ, EQ8 and EQ3. They can be found in EQ and Filters subsection of Audio Effects, or if you're using Ableton Live 12, then under the mentioned tags. With the help of these tools you can sculpt the frequency balance of a sound. So what does that mean and when you'd want to use it? For example, if you want to boost the bass or use the mids, or when you want to fix something that is sounding boomy, boxy or harshy, or you want to make some sound softer or harder. So if you ever come across any of these scenarios, you need to adjust the frequency balance of a sound, and spectral tools are the ones you need. Dynamic effects react to and attenuate the loudness of a signal. So compression, limiting, expansion and gate are examples of this type of effects. Ableton Live's dynamic effects include compressor, gate, glue compressor, limiter and multi-band dynamics. They can be found in Dynamics subsection of Audio Effects, or if you are using Ableton Live 12, then under the mentioned tag. First of all, you shouldn't be afraid of the word compression because it doesn't have any negative meaning in this particular case. Dynamic effects deal with dynamic range of the signal. In other words, the difference between the loudest and the quietest parts of it. So treat these tools as automated volume adjusters. For example, if you have a recording with uneven signal level, you can use a compressor to fix that. If you boost your song's volume or volume of any of the tracks way too much, then chances are you'll end up with distortion caused by clipping. Using a limiter will prevent that from happening. If you need to deal with a record that looks like a sausage, then it probably sounds like a sausage, flat and lifeless. To bring some life back into such a record and to add some spikes to it, use an expander. And finally, if you have a record with background noise between the phrases, you can use gate to silence the signal below a certain level. Modulation effects focus on the signal itself, changing the form and shape of a sound wave. So flanger, phaser or chorus are good examples of modulation effects. Ableton Live's modulation effects include chorus ensemble and phaser flanger. They can be found in pitch and modulation subsection of audio effects, or if you are using Ableton Live 12, then under modulation or stereo tags. The main purpose of these effects is to create some kind of an atmosphere or mood for the song. Think about the rock music and the huge variety of pedals for guitars. So 1 minute the guitar gives just a regular acoustic sound, but then the player stomps on the pedal and the sound changes dramatically in an instant. This is done via modulation, changing the waveform, which affects not only the tone and the shape of the sound, but also its pitch. So if you want to add some interesting flavor to otherwise regular instrument, try modulation effects on it and see what happens. Harmonic effects are named this way because they add harmonics to the sound. Saturation and distortion are the best words that can describe this type of effects. Ableton Live's harmonic effects include amp, cabinet, overdrive, pedal, saturator, and so on. They can be found in drive and color subsection of audio effects, or if you're using Ableton Live 12, then under the amp simulation and distortion tags. You'd use harmonic effects when you want to add some character to the sound, from subtle to brutal, or to enrich its frequency range. And this is the core difference from spectral effects. So spectral effects attenuate existing frequencies, while harmonic effects add new ones. You can also come across the word color that reference the same thing, and actually this is the core idea behind the plugins that try to emulate some hardware existing in real world. By applying some compression or filter via a plugin that emulates such hardware, you'll most probably be saturating the sound whether you want it or not. This is because the analog equipment adds its acoustic fingerprint, bringing something new to the initial sound via harmonics. Time-based effects do not alter the initial signal in any way. Instead, they create one or several copies of it with a shift in timing or pitch or both. Reverb, echo, and delay are examples of this type of effects. Ableton Live's time-based effects include delay, echo, filter delay, grain delay, hybrid reverb, reverb, and so on. They can be found in delay and loop and reverb and resonance subsections of audio effects. Or if you're using Ableton Live 12, then under the delay and reverb tags. Time-based effects are used to create the feeling of space. So with these effects you can put a sound into a small room, a big room, a church, a big hall, and so on. The result of using them can be even more impressive if you use more than one of them in the chain. So for example, the reverb after delay or delay after reverb. There's a couple of side effects from using these tools. The obvious one is that you can easily fill the gaps between otherwise isolated sounds in the same track this way. The less obvious is that time-based effects can act like a glue for your song. That's why there's even a recommendation of using just a little bit of reverb on a master track to make the whole composition sound more polished and consistent. Now let's come back to the project from the previous video and see how some of these effects work. I'll be applying spectral modulation and time-based effects on some of the tracks. So let's open the signal chain first. To do it, just double-click on the track's header and you'll see the signal chain appear in the lower part of the screen. This is exactly the place where you'll be putting your effects, both Ableton's own tools and any third-party plugins. And by the way, there's no limit to how many effects you can put here. The only real limitation will be your hardware. So what I suggest we do is we put a delay on the guitar track, equalizer on a pads track, and a phaser flanger on keys. So this is how delay looks like. And the first thing what I want to do is I want to reduce the feedback because I don't need such a long tail on delay. Yeah, then what I want to do is I want to make it a ping pong delay. Okay, we can see that the sound now bounces between left and right. So, and the final thing here that is good for the demo is just to finalize the dry wet knob at 30% or something. Right, next, let's go to the pads track and add echo 8 to this track. So what I want to do is I just want to remove a little bit from the low end. So I'd use the shelf and just reduce it a little bit. So that's how equalizer works. And finally, let's go to, I already worked on the pads track, so now let's go to keys track and add phaser flanger. Okay, so I adjusted the rate a little bit. Then what I want to do is I want to add some warmth. Now it's completely wet, so maybe we should reduce it and make it like 70% or something. Okay, so now with and without. So this is a quick demo of how this stuff works. Well, I'm sure I'll come back to like all these effects and to cover them in more detail in some upcoming videos, so just stay tuned. It's important to note that the signal chain is optional for audio tracks, group tracks, return tracks and master track. But you cannot make MIDI tracks work without it. And the reason is that MIDI tracks require sound sources that come in the form of virtual instruments, and you can only use them in signal chains. That's why virtual instruments will be the topic of my next video, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you so much for watching. Now, if you think I helped you today with this video, then now it's your turn to help me by liking, sharing and subscribing to the channel. Until then, take care, bye bye, see you!